Welcome to Powered Up, the podcast connecting industry leading voices who are energizing the future. Today, we're diving into one of the biggest shifts in modern infrastructure, the move from traditional fueling to the fast paced world of EV and e mobility. And today's guest is a globally experienced leader with over 2 decades driving high performance teams. He's built startups from the ground up and operationally launched Connect across Europe, North America, and beyond. James, welcome to Powered Up. We're excited for this one.
Hey, thanks, Amelia. Very happy to be on board. Very much looking forward to our chat.
Fantastic. So let's jump straight into it. You started your career leading service operations in the retail fueling sector. I'm super keen to find out what those early years did for tech and what you learned about customer expectations, especially compared to EV.
Sure. Probably the best place I can start with is actually a little bit of a story. I can remember actually, this was quite far into the journey of kind of launching Connect, that we were sitting down with a major fueling retailer in the US. And I can remember feeling quite proud of ourselves at the time. We're about to launch a new solution, effectively saying, hey, we can guarantee that you can meet the NEVI requirements. Now, the NEVI requirements mandated that you needed 97% uptime. And when I kind of unveiled this, hey, we will guarantee that you'll get this 97% uptime piece, I was expecting the fueling retailer to kind of be blown away and be like, wow, that's amazing in e-mobility. And there was this stony silence, which kind of shocked me. And he kind of looked back at us and went, are you seriously telling me that I'm only going to get 97% uptime? I've been buying your gas pumps for years and it's been well in excess of 99.9%. So if you can't hit that, then there seriously is a problem. I think that, well, I'll be honest, at the time I was kind of almost defensive, thinking, should I fight back? But I had to reflect on that and kind of go, wow, okay. I think those in the industry probably understand that the e-mobility journey and kind of uptime is quite low to begin with, but that is going very much up. But it was a real kind of leveler to have someone from the kind of mainstream fueling retailer just kind of remind us, okay, what the expectations that they have in there. And if I can quote a few stats going in there, I mean, at the moment, if you look at uptime across all the networks in the US as an example, so I took the data from Parents recently, and in early part of this year, they were averaging 83% uptime across the whole of the US.
Wow.
Now, what you see is some little pockets where it's a lot higher. So understandably, California is much higher because they've been running for a lot longer. So they're about 87%. But when I contrast that to probably a little bit more maturity over this side of the pond in Europe, we're kind of in the 95s plus. So it's quite a start there. And all of that really does come down to maturity, which we'll touch a bit more on later in our discussions.
Yeah, I think it's quite an eye opener when when you're transitioning, the expectations that are set didn't expect that. Can you talk us through how that shaped your thinking for e-mobility moving forward?
So I guess really it was down to kind of how do we meet those expectations of what our customers. Now, I primarily focused on fueling retailers. So I worked at Gilbarco Veeder-Root, so one of the biggest suppliers of retail fueling equipment across the industry. So our customers were typically used to that at high level of uptime. And also they wanted the same level of experience that they received in the fueling retail space. So they expected us to have spare parts. They expected us to be there within a matter of hours. If there was an emergency on site, we had to literally be able to isolate and make things safe almost instantaneously. The major benefits that we had though in the mobility space is so much of our world is connected. So actually, I was getting a lot of the access to technology I dreamt of in the fueling retail space. I mean, having a gas pump fully connected and being able to kind of remotely monitor it constantly would have been a dream. Whereas I got that on a charger. So yeah, effectively using those advantages where I could, but really trying to bring up the maturity on the expectations around making sure the spare parts are in place, making sure that the field team are ready and on site at the timings that they would normally be used to.
It sounds like it was quite the transition from you being awoken into your dreams, moving into e-mobility. When you moved into the space, you focused heavily on understanding the voice of the customer. So, were there any specific pains that you were hearing quite early on that opened your eyes in the sector?
Sure. I actually, right in the early part of the journey, I spent a lot of time talking through to fueling retailers to really understand the challenges that needed addressing in the marketplace. And it was fairly easy at that stage to kind of almost bucket the fueling retailers into two main segments. So you had probably two or three fueling retailers that are really advanced. They'd really kind of lent in, they'd invested heavily, that they'd accepted they had to knit everything together.
Yeah.
Whereas, on the other hand, we had a lot of fueling retailers who were kind of a bit nervous what to do, and they weren't quite sure how to start. And it was that really that we kind of focused on, and we launched the business eVerse to really focus on that particular segment, on the affecting the fueling retailer going, okay, I think I need to buy a charger. And you kind of go, well, yeah, you do just need to buy a charger, but you need everything else. Like, you need a back end to run it. You need a payment system to kind of make sure you're getting payment in there. You need connectivity constantly. And it was really trying to help those fueling retailers who were beginning to get themselves going, but didn't know how to get going and needed a helping hand to get going. And that's where eVerse effectively stepped in, because we managed that operational element for them. We managed that back end for them. We managed the payment side of things for them and helped them get started while they began to understand what it meant to then scale.
Yeah, it sounds like quite the challenge. Almost kind of teaching a baby steps at the time, to move somebody into e-mobility. With that process, what did that teach you about user behavior? Were there any kind of key learning points for you from that opportunity?
I think I touched on it slightly, and I won't necessarily talk about user interface. I'll talk a little bit about the journey that, let's say, somebody acquiring a charger on a site needs to go through.
Hmm.
And the bit that always resonated with me is the first discussion usually is, hey, I've seen a really cool charger. And that's typically what most people will start with. They'll typically want to get the fastest, most snazzy charger and kind of not understand all of the other things that come with it.
Yeah.
Typically, they'll default to, I need uh, I don't know, a 1 megawatt charging unit coming through, which is ridiculous. Typically, people don't need that on their site. They typically don't understand how much grid capacity they've got on site as well. So it's really trying to spend that time educating that particular customer to kind of work with them and say, hey, these are the things you need to kind of pull together the pieces of the jigsaw to make it actually work on site.
Yeah. It sounds like an awful lot of myth busting and just educating the user. Are there any other myths in the EV sector that you feel is holding the industry back at the moment?
I was recently listening to a podcast. There was this great analogy where they were talking through that if, let's say, EVs had always been around,
Hmm.
and we've been driving EVs for, say, the last 40, 50 years, and they were commonplace. If you then had to try and convince somebody then to drive an ICE vehicle, a combustion engine vehicle, can you imagine the discussion you'd be having with them? It's a case of, hey, so you know your EV that you can conveniently charge at home. Maintenance side of things, it's typically quite reliable, so you don't need to worry about it. Well, hey, you're going to now need to go and buy a car that you're going to need to change filters on. It will probably leak quite regularly oil on your driveway. You're then going to have to pour a load of really flammable fluid into a tank to be able to make it go further forward. I mean, can you imagine that discussion and kind of how you would try to convert them round? Whereas EVs seem like a logical step forward, whereas when you look at it the other way around, I'm not sure whether ICE vehicles necessarily do. But don't get me wrong, I'm still a huge fan of ICE vehicles too. There is a time and a place when it makes total sense to have one of those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit it on the head there. There's a lot of negativity in the industry, swaying people away from purchasing EV vehicles. When people transition to EV for the first time, is there anything that actually slows them down?
So I know it's been talked about quite a lot about kind of range anxiety, then moving on to charging anxiety, etc. So if I talk that through for what that means in reality, and typically when you're buying your first EV, you're thinking, hey, I need the car with the biggest amount of range
Hmm.
because I can't possibly be able to charge it on the go. That would be scary. Then when you get over that, then you get to kind of charger anxiety, which is effectively you're worried that when you get to site that you can actually charge. And there are good reasons why that could be an anxiety you have. But and I personally did definitely go through that. I still to this day will take some convincing to only go to a site that I know's only got one charger, because usually you've got the statistics that it's probably being in use and potentially it could also be out of action. So the stats don't work in your favor there. Probably the best bit of advice I was given was don't treat it like a normal fueling experience. Typically, you go to a gas pump, you'll put the nozzle in, and you'll fill the tank up fully. Well, that isn't the case with an EV. Typically, you'll kind of look at how much you need to charge on the go, and you'll charge up that amount. I mean, so much so, I have been caught, and my family laugh at this, that when we're going to, let's say we're stopping off at a service station somewhere, I will be the guy running out halfway through eating something in the service station to unplug the car and move it so someone else can have a go on the charger. More because don't want to overcharge the vehicle. I don't need to put that much into the vehicle. I'll just charge the rest when I get home.
So
So yeah,
what you're basically saying is you're a considerate EV user. You move your
yes.
car out the way. Awesome. So we've spoken from a personal perspective, but from your viewpoint across both fueling and EV, what's the biggest pain points in the market right now? So for operators and end users.
So we've talked a little bit about kind of uptime, and I will say the trend I'm seeing is very positive. We're seeing uptime numbers go entirely in the right direction, and that would be expected as a business or a market matures. That's to be expected. Um, hey, there's a few wonderful outliers where we've got people stealing charging cables with the belief that they're going to make their money out of selling the huge amount of copper that's in them. The reality is it's about a couple of pounds. So please don't steal charging cables. It's really annoying. Um, but I think probably the biggest opportunity and kind of challenge, I guess, for people installing a large amount of charge point operations going on is really trying to make sure they've got the grid capacity.
Hmm.
And probably one of the interesting things here is where you start to look at how a battery can help you on that side of things. So you're beginning to see more and more sites deploy battery backups or battery solutions on site to help balance that load on the site, which effectively means you don't need to take as much electricity from the grid in order to keep the sites charging. Now, if you had gone back, let's say, I don't know, like 6, 7 years ago, I mean, if I were to look at the cost of how much a battery would have cost, it would have been like £1,000 or $1,000 effectively per kilowatt hour that you'd be paying. That number's come down almost by a magnitude of 10 now. So we're kind of at least a tenth of the price on the battery technology further going forward. And that looks like that's going to come down even further. So with that technology, what we're going to be able to do is start to enable a lot of sites that typically it would have taken a lot longer to get the grid capacity on site to get the chargers in operation, can now be put in operation with the battery backup solutions.
Oh, fantastic. What's the driver behind the cost of batteries coming down? Is it more widespread demand?
I'd love to pretend like I truly know the firm answer, but what you're saying, obviously, it's once again just getting down to economics of scale. So as the businesses ramp up, they're able to make them more cheaply, but
Hmm.
they are also formulating better chemistry in there. Now, I am a chemist by trade, but I would love to pretend I know battery chemistry incredibly well, but I don't. But effectively, there are some very interesting opportunities around sodium and what that looks like, which will be the next big step change in terms of pricing.
Fantastic. We'll swerve over the chemistry side of things for now, but you have lived quite a exciting life transforming into e-mobility, and with that, you've worked across the UK, Nordics, Europe, and North America. You mentioned earlier about pains and maturities differ between regions. Can you touch on that from your experience?
Yeah, sure. Um, so when I started my e-mobility journey in Europe. So I typically worked really in the UK and the Nordics. That was kind of where I learned. Now, when I started, it was very clear Norway was what I'd call center of the sun. So you basically had Norway, which was like massively advanced. And then as you kind of came away from Norway, you kind of found other areas, kind of the adoption levels were effectively kind of cascading out. So you had kind of the UK, Germany, and kind of the surrounding Nordic countries as well, kind of picking up at a similar pace. But Norway was very much center of the sun. Now, when I started looking at what the North American market looked like, uh, we found a similar exercise. So it's easy to say that North America was simply a little bit behind the curve. So I mean, depending on where you look, whether it's California, which is quite far advanced, to some of the other states. Um, you could probably say like a year, maybe 2 years behind. And that's one paradigm to think about. The other bit, which I suppose kind of struck me when I started working out in North America a lot more, is that it's no surprise North America is huge, right? It's just the distances involved are massive. And kind of when I looked into it a bit more, I began to understand. I mean, if you look at the average journey size for someone driving in a car in Europe, it's pretty much double in North America. So suddenly the on-the-go charging piece becomes a lot more prevalent, and the effectively the infrastructure on the go becomes much more important in North America. So although North America, I would say, is behind a little bit, I can only see that going a lot quicker because it's going to need to, and that will drive that behaviour to kind of get the industry a lot more mature further going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And would you say that any learnings from Europe specifically translate well into North America, and which ones that maybe don't?
Well, I guess probably the best way to summarize this, and this is how we talked about it internally at Connect. We tended to categorize maturity of our customers on the kind of paradigm of crawl, walk, run. So effectively, you're just getting started. You're effectively kind of crawling. You're beginning to get on your feet. And then at the far end of the spectrum, you're quite mature and you're at the running stage. Now, what we typically found was people at the crawling stage in Europe were having exactly the same challenges in North America, and it was typically just a lag that we were seeing on that side of things. So, as we touched on before, what we typically found in the early stages is that people were kind of like, "Hey, I just need to buy a charger. What do I do?" And then we had to kind of say, "Well, you need a little bit more than that behind the scenes," and help them operationally to get started. Whereas if you flick it all the way to the other end of the spectrum, where you've got what I would say at the time that we were there in Europe, it was kind of 3 or 4 key fueling retailers who were running really fast and taking a lot on themselves. They weren't necessarily interested in kind of how we could help them kind of get started. They were like, okay, we're at a point now and we need to know how to scale. And how do we do that? And that was typically making sure that we gave them things like the best software on the marketplace. So the back end software became critically important to allow them to scale so that they had all of the right tools to be able to monitor their network in the most efficient way possible. So I suppose the lessons that we learned were really trying to understand at what stage your customer was at, and then giving them the right solutions and tools they needed to solve the pains and the problems they were having. And that translated really across UK, Europe, across to North America in the same way. There was no real major differences there.
That's a great explanation. When we look kind of 5 years ahead, you've been in the industry quite a while now, but what do you hope the EV charging industry gets right in a couple of years' time?
I will say, and I'll call it a small amount of time because it still feels as the time has flown by massively. Um, but I would say what the experience is like now to say what it was like 6, 7 years ago is night and day already. So the idea of thinking what it's going to be like in 5 years' time really excites me because then it starts getting really interesting. Um, Now, I'm going to use a quote that I've used before, so I'll put this out there. But I tend to use my mum in the kind of thought processes here. So I have to think of how can I make charging so easy that even my mum would feel comfortable about owning an EV, so she wouldn't have to worry about charging up a vehicle both at home or on the go. And that's usually a good barometer to kind of say, how easy have I made this? Now, in the early stages, the early adopters, we're all quite happy to kind of have an app and then register the app and kind of wander around trying to get data to download the app because there wasn't mobile signal at the site and all of those challenges that it took to kind of get us started. The reality is, I'd say certainly my mum would not feel comfortable with that at all. She would just literally want to rock up, plug in, unplug, go. I mean, even better, she would just like to roll up onto a pad and have some induction charging happen and then the magic go further forward. But I suppose that's what I would like to see. I'd like to see the continuing trend that we're seeing, that it just becomes accessible and easy for everyone to use.
Hmm.
And all of these pains that we see now are just a forethought. I mean, let's call out a major newspaper chain in the UK, which will remain unnamed. I would say I would like them to run out of stories. I don't want to kind of hear of kind of the potential that it was nearly an EV vehicle that burnt down the car park at Luton Airport. It's those things that we've just got to stop, and we've just got to kind of make it so easy that everyone just goes, hey, actually, these kind of work. Let's just use them.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I had a recent story in the town where I live that an EV charger set on fire, causing an explosion in a building. That's not what happened at all. It wasn't an EV charger, but that's what was all over the media, was that it was an EV charger because there were EV charging points there. So completely agree. There's a lot of negativity in the media that is quite speculative a lot of the time. And you mentioned about your mum kind of rolling up onto a charging pad. With AI being everywhere now, does AI genuinely add value in EV and e-mobility? Is this something that's going to help change the future?
I first off, yes, I definitely think that will be the case. There are some interesting interpretations of AI in the industry, and I think probably everyone on their kind of stat sheet of a charger or a vehicle, they all need to have AI somewhere just to kind of tick the box and say they've got it. But if we take some of that kind of hype away, there's some really interesting things that we could start to kind of look at. Now, the beauty with our connected world now is what that gives you in terms of data is huge. You can really start to understand kind of the flow of vehicles, the charging points of vehicles, the speed at which vehicles are charging, the type of vehicles that are charging at certain times.
Hmm.
Now, that generates a lot of data coming through. And now the beauty with something like AI is you can use that huge amount of data to effectively drive some quite keen decisions that you need. And probably the logical one to look at is like grid. If you could really understand and look at the data that you've collected over many years, you could really begin to accurately understand kind of when your peak load is going to be and start challenging and trying to alter that behavior. I mean, the days when we start seeing charging being charged at different price points to try and alter that behavior to be able to lower and kind of balance the grid side of things, we do it at home at the moment. It's a logical next step for us to further going forward.
Fantastic. Is there anything that you're expecting to see as a major milestone kind of in 5 years time that's potentially come out of AI?
I have kind of reliability and uptime in my blood. That's kind of I've had a career coming through from manufacturing where kind of seconds are kind of priceless. So, and then running service businesses over the last few years, I suppose where I would love to see the kind of real benefit of AI is to start using once again the data that we've got to really start to drive that user experience, so nobody ever sees a charger down. It's always kind of proactively looking, monitoring, and kind of saying, hey, I know this charger is about to go down. I'm going to make sure that I automate a process now that a field service engineer is going to be on his way to go and get that site fixed, or I've already done an automated power cycle to test this, and this. There are glimpses of this happening already, so this isn't kind of revolutionary at the moment. But I think when you've got that mainstream and that expectation that's there further going forward, that's going to be quite exciting.
Absolutely, absolutely. And hey, who knows? In 5 years' time, your mum might be finally driving an EV.
Yeah, I'm slightly worried my mum driving an EV, but yes, if she can, it's fine.
Awesome. So it's been absolutely great to have you on the episode. Before we wrap up, we ask every guest this final question. And it's, if you could leave our listeners with one thought to help power up the future, what would it be?
Okay. So I'm gonna. This might kind of give a little bit away of how old I am. So I can remember going out to bars and nightclubs of an evening and kind of walking into the bar and there being a heavy haze of smoke lining the ceiling. And kind of go, oh crikey, okay. And you'd walk in there, and inevitably the next day you'd wake up and your clothes absolutely reeked of smoke. It was just kind of a kind of an expectation of going out for the evening. You'd come back and all your clothes would smell. Now, fast forward to the present day. I mean, if I were to go out and kind of walk into a club with, I'd be like, good grief, what's happened in here? I mean, I were coming home with my clothes stinking of smoke would just be like, what on earth has happened for the evening? And it's almost like history repeating itself here with the kind of e-mobility journey. So we've got major cities across the globe now that we are seeing really great data that as the transition across to gets higher and higher, we're seeing the air quality in the cities also getting better and better. I am genuinely looking forward to the day when my kids are out there not seeing any actual difference in walking around in a city compared to walking around in the open countryside, and the air quality just becomes the same. And city use is such the perfect use case for EVs that it makes total sense. I mean, I can honestly say, going into London nowadays, now that all of the major buses have started their electrification journey, you've got taxis on hybrids, you've got so many more EVs on the road there. It's much more pleasant now walking around London.
Yeah.
I can only see that going even further. And I'd like it to be that same paradigm that going back to kind of the smoking ban happening in pubs and restaurants, and kind of that shock of it actually being a smoky environment that we used to go out in. I'd like that same shock that you have now further going forward when you walk into a city because of the benefits of EVs.
That's a fantastic way to put it, and actually something that I've never thought of, so thank you so much. James, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on Powered Up today. Really appreciate your time and sharing your experience and your insights. If anybody wants to check out some of the work you've done previously, or get to know a bit more of your background, where should they take a look?
Hey, I'm always happy for people to reach out through to me on LinkedIn, so you can kind of see a little bit of my history and then kind of where I've got to there. But yeah, always happy to connect further if anyone wants to chat.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for your time on Powered Up, James. And for everyone listening, we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you, guys.
Take care.